Good evening, everybody, and welcome everyone, a lot of ones actually, to BPCG at Home. We are delighted that you could join us for an evening of conversation with the author, psychiatrist and psychotherapist, Sue Stuart Smith. In a moment, I'm going to pass the mic over to Kate, the director of BPCG, who will be our host for the evening. Before that, just a little bit of digital housekeeping. It's a Zoom, you know how it is. You will note that you have come in on Zoom, on mute, and I've been doing my best to mute participants as they arrive. We would ask you to remain on mute for the rest of the evening. We are over the moon to have so many guests tonight, but it means that the question and answer segment that we've had at the end of previous BPCG at Home events is just not really practical, but fear not, I will be moderating the chat section all evening, so please do get involved there. And if you have questions that you would like to put to Sue, then drop them in there. I'll do our best to summarize and sort of convey as many of those questions as possible towards the end of the event. That's more than enough from me. I will be back at the end for some more housekeeping. But for now, huge thank you to Sue and Kate. Over to you. Let me know if you're off mute and ready to go.
Thank you, Josh. And welcome to Sue and to all of you tonight to our at-home talk with Brockwell Greenhouses. It's indeed an odd positive of this very difficult time that we're able to bring so many of you together tonight. And believe me, it's definitely more comfortable for you to be at home than in our greenhouses on a night like tonight. Sue did her first degree in English literature and then trained as a doctor. She's a practicing psychotherapist and psychiatrist and now teaches at the Tavistock Clinic, as well as consulting for Doc Health. Her wonderful book, I promised I wouldn't gush about it, but it is a wonderful book, The Well-Gardened Mind, which she is going to share with us tonight, reflects her own multidisciplinary background, combining case studies and personal memoir with history, literature, philosophy, psychiatry, psychology, psychoanalysis, biology, and neuroscience. But please don't let that long list of isms and ologies put you off, because The Well-Gardened Mind is a really beautifully written and accessible book, packed full of stories, insights, and wisdom, but with its feet and hands really firmly in the soil. At its heart, Sue's book explores why and how we can recover our connectivity with nature, and in so doing, how we can find belonging. But that's enough from me. I know you all want to hear from Sue, so I'll pass over to her. Thank you.
Kate, thank you very much for that lovely introduction. And I'm really thrilled to be joining the Brockwell Greenhouses and this evening with everybody here. It's a great pleasure to be able to do it. So I'm going to try and do a screen share. See if that works. Hopefully this is going to work. Okay. So here we are. The book came out in April, really quite soon after the first lockdown. So it's a sort of pandemic publication, if you like. And I'll talk a bit more later on about the effects of the pandemic on our psyche and the turn to gardening that's really happened, and the turn to nature actually that's happened as a result of it. But I'm going to start with my journey and a bit about why I wrote the book and also my own gardening and how that developed. So the book really brings together two different sides of my life, my working life as a psychiatrist and psychotherapist, and then my home life, where I'm married to the garden designer, Tom Stuart Smith. And just over 30 years ago, soon after we were married, we had the opportunity to move very close to his family, to a dilapidated barn and an empty field that belonged to his family. And we started this journey of creating a garden there and creating a home there. I'm going to show you. So this is a very early photograph taken. We can date all our photographs from the age of children in it, and our daughter Rose is there in the little red hat. So I think this must be about 1989, something like that. So I mean, gardening is, and particularly when you start with a blank slate, a lot of graft, a lot of hard work. You know, it can be grueling. This field was very, very, very muddy and stony. And at the beginning, I was a complete garden skeptic. As far as I was concerned, it was something which I'd always seen as being like outdoor housework, if you like, except that it was nicer to be outside. But I was very motivated to, you know, I followed Tom. I mean, Tom was very knowledgeable, and you know, we wanted to make a home, and living on a windy field, it felt really important to kind of create some enclosure around us, and also, you know, make the landscape around us feel less industrial, because we used to have combine harvesters coming and you know, with the collecting the hay and the you know, the spraying and the pesticides and things like that. So so you can see there the tiny hedges as they went in, and you know, amazingly things grow. Not everything grows, but you know, things do grow. And so I'm now going to show you what it's like more or less now. That's pretty much the same plot, just slightly different angle. So you know, you can see the difference in the hedges, and this is entirely Tom's creative vision, creating these patterns and enclosures. And I'll show you another part of this same field, which is here, which is actually a complete contrast in the sense that there's no planting within it. It's a simple enclosure of hornbeam hedges. And I think through living with this, I really came to understand the importance of enclosure in gardens, partly because we really had suffered very badly at the beginning from the exposed nature of the site. And the harsh, the site looks north on this side of the house, so that the winds were pretty harsh. The amazing thing about this, as the hedges grew up, is the versatility of this space, because it's a fantastic space for having parties in. So it's a very social space. It's a fantastic space for children to play in. So it was a football pitch or a badminton court and so on. But it is also a wonderful space in which to simply be on your own and be immersed in the greenness of the planting around you. And I think it's sort of that contrast really of how a garden can provide both of those experiences within the same space, I think is very important to the things that gardens offer us collectively. Because there is also a quality of aloneness in a garden, which is isn't about isolation. And I think at a time when we have all been struggling with a great deal of social isolation, that is a lot of the respite that people have found in their gardens, is this sense of you can be alone, but you're not isolated. You're surrounded by life, not just the life of the plants, but all the other life forms, the birds and the insects and so on that visit the garden. This connection to life, to the planet ultimately. You can derive all of that through the garden. I'm going to show you a very different enclosure, which is on the other side of the house, which is our courtyard garden. This garden is in its peak moment in this slide. It's taken in early July, with the broom trees in full flower. And the salvia as well. And this, when we first arrived, we didn't actually own the strip behind us that I showed you just now when we first took on the barn. This was our only garden, this courtyard, and it was very, very different then. We planted everything in it. It had roses in it. We grew cabbages in it. It had runner beans on bean poles. And lots of herbs and so on, because it's very near our kitchen. So for about 15 years it stayed like that, and then it was getting quite tired, and the rest of the garden had expanded, and I had created a vegetable plot around the back, and Tom brought a Chelsea flower show garden back, or the bones of it back, which is what you see here with these tanks. And actually having water around us for me was a complete revelation in how much it shifts your psyche, actually, to live with water every day, which we'd not had before. So this is the other side of the house. So beyond the garden that I showed you, where we were planting the hedges and so on, this connects us to the fields below us that are still cultivated, and we sowed it with flowers, probably starting about 5 or 6 years after we first arrived here, and planted it with bulbs, as you can see. And one of the things I think that again this sort of illustrates about gardens and about the way we respond to them is an idea that I develop in the book about transitional space, about the idea of the garden as an in-between space, so that it's neither part of the house or part of the whether it's the countryside or the wilderness or the city. It's something in between. It contains elements of both. And in our garden, there's a sort of progression, you know, it becomes sort of wilder the nearer you get to the edges of the garden. I'll show you this same meadow at a different time of year in the summer. There, that's looking back towards the house with the scabious. And what's been amazing about this meadow is watching it develop, really, you know, setting something in motion in a way. It's not exactly gardening, but I don't quite know what else you can call it. It's, you know, the term rewilding wasn't around when we started on this. And it's the habitat changes that have happened, the amount of, you know, the bird life that comes into the meadow, the you know, the wonderful bonnet moths, which are so beautiful, and these vivid common blue butterflies that kind of now populate this place that before was really quite a barren field. So this is also in our garden, and it's Camasias, taken this May, just gone, and it's got a different kind of link with the book, because one of the things that I wanted to explore when I set out on researching the book was to understand something of the origins of cultivation. You know, how and when did people first start cultivating the earth? And I didn't really believe the conventional narrative that farming came first and gardening came later. It didn't make sense to me. And what I discovered is that actually in the last 10 to 15 years, within the field of archaeology, there is much great interest in this period of our sort of prehistory, before agriculture developed, the sort of late Paleolithic period, and that actually one of the things I discovered through reading lots and lots of research into this is that there is actually no clear line between foraging on the one hand and farming on the other. That there's a large, as one archaeologist wrote it, a large middle ground. And this made sense to me because of gardening. You know, if you think about cultivating staple foods, then yes, the origin of that, it lies with Neolithic farming. But there's increasing, sort of mounting bodies of evidence that hunter-gatherers practiced something called managed foraging long before farming took off, and that involved sort of basic gardening techniques in some cases. You know, weeding out undesirable plants, transplanting saplings, diverting water, and so on. And actually also, it has to be said, using fire. And fire was actually the first way of changing the landscape. The other thing that the other part of the conventional narrative that was overthrown when I embarked on, when I came to understand more about it, is that people didn't start growing food because they needed staple foods. There's evidence that actually the very first areas that were cultivated, where small gardens appear in the archaeological record, are sites where there's an abundance of wild resources. So there was no problem with foraging, but people had time, presumably, to experiment and create plots, and that within those plots they were growing things that were scarce or very desirable or highly sought after. I mean, that is the current belief about what took place. So this would have included things like medicinal herbs or culinary herbs, as well as dyes and so on. So from the very, very beginning, when our remote ancestors started gardening, it was about a life-enhancing process. It was a cultural process. It wasn't about survival. And I think that's very, very important. Now, in terms of the history of and I think one of the reasons that history has got a bit eclipsed is as a result of colonialism, when in the 18th and 19th centuries, settlers took with them what one archaeologist has called the agricultural mindset, and if they did encounter indigenous cultivation, they didn't really take much note of what kind of cultivation was being practiced. There's a very compelling example of this, which is linked to the Camassias, which is why they're on this slide. So in 1843, James Douglas, who's a British explorer, landed on the south shores of Vancouver Island in British Columbia. And he was looking for a new trading post for the Hudson's Bay Company. And he encountered these exquisite meadowlands of Camassias and ancient Garry oaks, very similar to what's here. And he wrote home that this was an untouched Eden. And much of this land was ploughed up and used for farming, not very successfully, it has to be said. But what the settlers had overlooked was that this was the home of the Lekwungen tribe, of the Coast Salish people, and that although they were foragers and and they lived by fishing as well, they also cultivated these meadows, and they cultivated them in order to harvest the bulbs of the camas plants, which were a delicacy. They were also an important source of inulin, a starch that would help them get through the winter. But even later on, when they started growing potatoes, for example, that earlier settlers had sort of, I think, introduced them to and then gone on, not stayed. They didn't stop growing cultivating their Camassias. And this is how the Camassias came to England as well. They came on boats back to the UK, and people started using them as ornamental plants in their gardens. But there are many other examples of how indigenous cultivation was overlooked, and how, for the Lekwungen, for example, these meadows were sacred. The Maori gardens, for example, involved an awful lot of skill in the plants that they were growing. They grew a wide variety of plants in their gardens, but they also had sacred gardens, which were devoted to the first harvest, the first fruits. And this, I draw in the book on the work of Tim Ingold, the anthropologist, who's researched the area of indigenous, what he calls hunter-gatherer cultivators. And what he highlights is the different mindset that that actually in all these instances that he quotes, there's a continuum of care. This is about care for the land and care for the plants, but the language that's used and the attitude to it is it's all in a continuum with caring for people. They're not actually distinguished. And how different this is from, if you like, the agricultural mindset and you know the mindset that has come to dominate our lives to a large extent, which is about seeing nature as a resource to be exploited, something that's much more about domination of nature rather than a reciprocal relationship of give and take and care. This is my own. This is the not quite the last one, nearly the last one from our own garden. This is my vegetable patch, and as you can see, it's got an awful lot of flowers in it too. I mean, it's the way that I like gardening. It's sort of really building on what I was saying just now. For me, there's something. What really draws me to gardening is this sense that it is a relationship, and in a way a kind of silent dialogue goes on. You know, if I do a bit in the garden and then leave it, I like to come back and see what's happened, see what nature's done as well. And the garden, this vegetable garden, is full of self-seeded flowers. You can see the poppies and the Scholzia and the verbena, you know, and they pop up everywhere actually. But I actually really relish that process rather than feeling the whole thing is under, or trying to make it under my control. Of course, in a garden, we never are completely in control. So this was taken in our greenhouse in last spring. And it was absolutely at the time when seeds, there was a run on seeds, actually. Seeds were in such demand because of the beginning of the pandemic. And I just wanted to pause for a minute and think a little bit about why and what was happening then, because I think it says so much about how gardening can help anybody in any kind of crisis, whether that's, you know, following a natural disaster, whether that's during or after a war, a personal crisis, a bereavement, a trauma, or as we were all going through with the pandemic, a kind of a mixture of these things, and a sort of collective crisis in which we were very isolated from each other and forced to sort of live a strange remote existence, which we're still sort of doing. So at this time, when life was filled with uncertainty and fear, the simple act of sowing seeds was an accessible way to construct something of a future, to be able to imagine something that might, you know, that would come to fruition. Particularly when holidays were cancelled, you know, all sorts of things. Weddings were cancelled. So many things that people were looking forward to had been cancelled. This forward aspect, forward-looking aspect of the garden is very important. And one of the things I came to understand in the book is, in terms of the gardening and the psyche, is how important our relationship to time is in the garden, and the different kinds of time we experience in the garden, as well as the different ways that we relate to time. Because the other thing that's often very helpful, particularly for somebody suffering from depression, let's say, who may find it hard to get going at times, And we can all be procrastinators as well. I mean, for me, it really helps me that there comes a point in the garden where I simply have to do something, or I miss that window of opportunity. So you get pulled into it. The garden gives you a structure. It gives you a seasonal calendar that you work with. And in that sense, we can feel we're part of something larger as well. And the other idea in that I'm very keen on is the feeling that you know, the seasons come back again, and when you're gardening, you can, you know, you're always learning, however experienced you are, and if something doesn't work one year, you can try again next year. And this circularity of time, I think, is very, very helpful to us, particularly when we live in an age in which a linear concept of time is so dominant, and in which also so many things are kind of fast tracked, or, you know, I don't know, speed dating, or, you know, one click shopping and so on. So actually this sense of entering into the rhythm of life, I think is a great antidote to 21st century life. I'll just say a little bit here, because while we're talking about the pandemic, about the importance of green nature on us. And because again, that was such an important sort of life-saving aspect for everyone who was allowed to leave their homes and exercise, was being able to get out and exercise in the parks. And green, there have been a lot of studies. Some of the most well cited studies are have been carried out into Essex University by Jules Pretty's team, and what their work's shown, and others have shown, is that exercising outdoors, or green exercise as it's known, is more effective in terms of reducing anxiety, improving mood, and revitalizing cognitive function than doing exactly the same exercise in a gym. The other thing that's important about connection with green nature, there's a great deal of research that's shown that it has a direct and quite rapid effect, beneficial effect on our cardiovascular system. And the person who pioneered this work is Roger Ulrich, and he actually started researching this field in the late 1980s. His works, he's been developing this whole area of biophilia, our connection with nature, particularly our connection with green nature, and showing that actually the body is primed to respond to these kind of surroundings. His and other studies have also shown effects on cortisol. So our stress hormone cortisol, which is measured through salivary cortisol in these studies, has been found to reduce, so to return to a more healthy level after about 20 minutes of being in a green space, or in some studies looking at green landscapes, so not, you know, virtual nature. This effect has also been found within cities in people who live near parks and gardens, in comparison to people who have no nature around them. And these are large epidemiological studies that control for other lifestyle factors that might contribute to that kind of effect. The other final thing to say about gardening in terms of our physiology is the contact with the soil. And in particular, the importance of the microbiome, the bacteria in the soil, many of which are what's become known as friendly bacteria. These are the bacteria that can enhance our immune system functioning and help reduce inflammation. And you know, medicine is beginning to wake up to the whole question of the microbiome, I remember going to a lecture when I was a medical student, and it was a rare moment when one of our microbiology lecturers started to talk about his concern about antibiotics and what was happening with the biome in the gut and so on. And that sowed a seed in my mind, and I didn't hear anybody mention it again until much more recently, with the focus on how depleted the microbiome is in many environments that people live in today, particularly in cities. Some of the most interesting research about soil bacteria has been carried out by Christopher Lowry, who used to be based at the University of Bristol and is now a professor in the States. And he's been investigating one particular bacteria called Mycobacterium vaccae, which research suggests it has an effect on us either through inhaling it or ingesting it, but probably through simply inhaling it when the soil is disturbed, on helping to boost serotonin levels in the brain. So the serotonin is the sort of, if you like, the antidepressant neurotransmitter. It gives us a background feeling of calm, but also a sort of more even mood, and actually more ability to cope with stress. He's actually researching it at the moment, this bacteria, in various modified forms as a treatment for PTSD, but he hasn't published any of that work yet. I think it's ongoing. Okay, I'm now going to introduce my grandfather, Ted May. So Ted was one of the inspirations for the book. This is him in his greenhouse, taken in his 60s, with these orchids that he was particularly proud of, and had won several local flower show prizes for. And I'd grown up with a hearing from my mother about how he'd been a prisoner of war during World War I. He was captured in Turkey, and that when he was finally released and made it home, which was after the end of the war, he spent almost the entire war in Turkey from April 1915 right to the end. He was very emaciated. He'd been labouring on roads and cement factories and so on. He was malnourished. He weighed 6 stone. He'd lost all his hair, and he was very traumatized. My grandmother didn't recognize him, and they weren't actually married at that point. They married soon after, and she saved his life, because he was the naval doctors predicted that he was too far gone. His malnourishment was so far gone, and there was damage to his heart and so on. And they predicted he probably wouldn't live more than a few months. So she nursed him very, very assiduously, and he regained his physical strength. But it was only, his full recovery didn't really happen until 1920, when he got the opportunity to attend a year-long horticultural rehabilitation program. This was one of many of these kind of programs that was set up after the First World War. And in many ways, the First World War marks the birth of horticultural therapy. There was men were returning home in such numbers and with so many disabilities, and struggling to reintegrate themselves and come back into the sort of working population. That actually there was a real sense of turning back to the land for healing and for hope. What I found out when I embarked on trying to find out more about Ted was that because nobody at that point, as far as I knew, nobody knew where he'd gone, where this rehabilitation had taken place. And what I found out was that he spent that year in a garden called Sarasbury Court. It's a place that's no longer there, but there is a public park there called Holly Hill, and it's on the shores of the Hamble near Southampton. And almost everything there has been demolished except for these beautiful lakes, which with tree ferns in the middle, which have survived. There were 10 glass houses there. It was a very large garden, and it had a palm house, a camellia house. A lot of these were heated. And Ted, I then found out from my cousin, who had a letter that was written when Ted left the program. He died with it. He still kept it. It detailed what he'd learned to do in that time, and it was clear he got a very wide range of experience, not growing fruits and vegetables in the plots in the vegetable garden, but also working with exotic plants. And when I discovered that, I really understood where his love of his greenhouse and his orchids had come from, and perhaps how much it must have meant to him afterwards to recreate something of that life-saving experience of being able to work in such a beautiful place and such a sort of flourishing place after everything that he'd been through. I'll say a little bit more about the First World War. This, as you can see, is well, maybe it's not obvious. It's a trench garden, so it's taken on the western front. It's the back wall of a trench, and this particular garden was made by some of the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders. The soldier who's shown in the picture was killed soon after this was taken. But what happened at the beginning of that war, well, the first spring, was that men began to write home, asking their relatives to send them seeds. And they sent them, seeds from home that they were familiar to them, whether it was nasturtiums or marigolds or morning glory and so on. And these trench gardens were not uncommon, and they were right on the front line. They were right in the middle of the fighting. And there were a number of things that lent themselves to this on the Western Front. One was the periods of inaction, which were often quite lengthy, and gardening gave people something to do. But more importantly, it gave them something creative to do. When they were actually very caught up in the machinery of war, surrounded by so much death and destruction. And, we all know what the landscape of the Somme looks like, the sort of burnt out, the blackened trees and so on. Something in terms of psychological survival, I think, depended on, for these soldiers, being able to create new life as well and be able to create beauty. And it's very easy, I think, to underestimate the human need for beauty. And I think we see it very strongly in extreme circumstances like this. I'll say a bit more about beauty later on. I'm going to show you one more slide. So I love this picture because you can sort of see the kind of calm focus and attention with which this is a soldier of the Gordon Highlanders, with which he's tending to his plants. And it's a real counterpoint, I think, coming at this subject from a psychoanalytic psychotherapy background. I really began to think about it in terms of Freud's thinking about eros and thanatos, the life drives and the destructive death drives, and how much this helped people hold on to their love of life. Very importantly as well, these simple acts of care, you know, would have been helping at a neurological level, because care is associated with our endorphin system, our endogenous, our natural opioids in the brain. So any form of care, whether it's to do with pets or people or plants, care has intrinsic neurobiological rewards. You know, I think it's built into our evolution, and I think particularly strong in humans because we have such a long period. Childhood is so long in humans that actually care has to have this this effect on us. And of course, there are times when care can be very burdensome, when it's too much, and that effect is lost. And that can happen, you know, in a garden as well as with people and so on. So there is something about getting that balance right, where you can experience enough of the reward of care to really benefit from it. And the important thing about endorphins is that they bring with them, you know, that it's a pleasurable, relaxed state, and a bit of a mood boost as well. So I'm going to move on and talk about some of the therapeutic projects that appear in the book. This one is Rydwell Organic Gardens, and I like this shot because you can really see very clearly the different parts of the garden, and within that, I think, you know, the way that a therapeutic garden can answer to different needs that people may have, either at different stages of their recovery or just simply, you know, from day to day. So you've got the very active vegetable beds, the food growing beds set out there, the raised beds, you've got the greenhouse area, but you've also got along the top the kind of more secluded parts of the garden, where there are various different kinds of enclosure that can be experienced. People who attend Bridewell have long-term mental health needs. Most of them stay for about 2 years. And at the end of that time, 60% of them are engaging with life in a very different way. It's a very successful program in that sense. So they may be in employment, they may be volunteering, they may have embarked on higher education or some kind of training. But you can see from the structure of this and the walled garden, that this sense of a place set apart, a safe enclosure. And this experience of safe enclosure is something that underpins so much of the therapeutics of garden projects, because really nothing can begin to change. You know, none of us can take anything new experiences in, unless we can let our guard down, unless we feel held in a way. And I think the enclosure of a garden is a kind of holding. This effect is absolutely crucial in PTSD. You know, many people who suffer from PTSD, well, actually it's a hallmark of it, most of them, they experience hypervigilance. So they're constantly scanning the environment for potential threats. And it is this quality of the garden in which people describe coming in and feeling their heart rate down, feeling a sense of safety. They don't have to sort of watch their back in the same way. This is another therapeutic garden. This one's based in Sweden. It's Alnarp, which is a centre that's done over the last 15 years a great deal of research, really really some very pioneering research papers into therapeutic gardening, rehabilitation gardening. The programs there are very different to Bridewell. They run on a 12-week basis, so they're short and they're intense. People attend Bridewell about twice a week, whereas here people come every morning or every afternoon, depends which group people are in. This part of the garden is as you can see, it's one of the secluded places that I was sort of mentioning earlier, and you can see the hammock and the pond and the large stone. And at the very beginning of the program, people are invited to find a place in the garden where they can simply just be with nature, just to be in and with nature, not to do any work at all. This approach is very much based on the work of an American psychiatrist and psychoanalyst called Harold Searles. He was writing in the 1960s and 70s, and he died in the 70s as well. He was really ahead of his time, I think. What he questioned was, in a way, he saw it as a bit of a blind spot in psychological approaches and psychoanalytic theory, to the human need for relationship to other species and other life forms, that the focus is so strongly on interpersonal relating, which of course it is so formative and important to us, but nevertheless, the relationships we can form with trees or stones, animals and so on, pets and so on, can be very, very important psychologically in sustaining us. And he observed that some of his patients who were admitted to the asylum where he worked were too fragile, particularly at the beginning of their stay, to manage human relationships, which after all are very complex. You know, interpersonal relating makes a lot of demands on us, and our lives today are so dominated by it. Even though for now, when we can't get together, social media and emails and texts and so on, there's a constant process of wondering what somebody's thinking about us or what they've made of what we've said, and so on. The simple thing about particularly plants, which I heard from a number of participants on therapy projects, is this feeling of unconditional acceptance that people can find in nature, and how vital that is to beginning to develop actually a different relationship with yourself, one that's maybe less judgmental, less harsh on yourself. And as one of the inmates at a prison program I visited said to me, nature doesn't judge you. And actually within the prison setting, this effect can be really transformative. I'm going to say a little bit about Freud, because he features quite largely in the book, and his love of gardens and his love of nature is an aspect of his life that isn't actually terribly well known or acknowledged. But from boyhood onwards, he was a plant collector. Actually, he was a great forager and something of an amateur botanist. This picture is him walking, I think probably with his daughter Anna. It's difficult to see who this figure is, but she tended this garden, and they're in the grounds of what's now the Freud Museum in London. And that Freud arrived here at the beginning of the last year of his life, so in September 1938. And I think it looks to me as if they're discussing what to plant or what to do in the garden. Freud's first love was wild nature, and he spent all his summer holidays, long summer holidays they were as well, traveling to the mountains with his family up to the Alps, and where he would hike a lot, he would write papers, and he would collect plant specimens. And his letters from there are full of a real love of nature. It was when he developed cancer in the mouth, which was a devastating diagnosis, about 16 years before he finally died. He was forbidden by his doctors to travel anymore. And he started renting villas on the outskirts of Vienna. And each year he rented a different villa until he found one that he particularly loved, that he returned to. These villas had large gardens, and as far as he was concerned, they needed to be beautiful gardens, because he was very obsessed by beauty. His patients would travel out and see him there, not in the garden, although he spent a lot of time in the garden. So this is Freud again, taken in Maresfield Gardens, in his garden bed, and he had this bed built for him in the last few years before he had to leave as a refugee, and in a garden called Grinzing, or in the neighborhood of Grinzing, which was his favorite. And it was a garden that had 10 acres, had woods and orchards, and looked over vineyards. And he would walk around the garden every day and observe the changes taking place in it. And visitor, in various memoirs that I quote in the book, visitors kind of record how they might have been trying to talk about some issue, important issue that was on their mind, but Freud would keep returning to his observations of nature. But this garden bed is a very good example of something that's come to be known within the hospice movement as a threshold space. That how important it is when people are very frail, when they're dying, to be able to not feel confined inside, and the threshold gives people a psychological threshold too. So that might be an outdoor bed, it might be a balcony, it might be simply a room with a view, but it gives that access to something beyond. And after all, when we can no longer walk around, our eyes can still travel. We can project ourselves into the landscape around us, the scenery around us. The other thing which comes across in some of Freud's letters is how important the continuity of life in the garden was, and I think that's something which can be important for all of us at any stage, but is particularly important when facing any kind of bereavement or loss, or the end of one's own life. And Robert Lifton, another American psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, called this symbolic survival, and he believed that we are not psychologically able to fully confront the pain of mortality without some feeling of something that lives on after us. And that may be through family, it may be through creativity, but for many people, they derive a great deal of a sense of symbolic survival through the enduring nature of the natural world, through the cycle of the seasons. So we're back to this is actually taken in my vegetable patch from the other end of the garden, looking back towards the greenhouse. And these delphiniums, I love blue flowers, and I particularly love the intensity of this blue. And so I want to return to the idea of beauty, really, the beauty of flowers. And there are two things that Freud said. One about flowers, which is that flowers have neither conflicts or emotions. And that sense of, the relief we can get from people are full of conflicts and emotions, and the beauty of a flower doesn't impose any of those things on us. He also noticed something that he said was the curious intoxicating effects of beauty, sort of mildly intoxicating effect of beauty, that he was somewhat puzzled by, but clearly valued enormously in his own life. And he goes on to say that whilst beauty cannot prevent us from suffering, it can compensate for a great deal. So I set out to kind of try and understand a bit more about the neuroscience of beauty. And sure enough, very interestingly, this sort of intoxicating effect that Freud describes has been confirmed by very different kind of studies involving brain scans. There's a neuroscientist who specializes in neuroaesthetics at University College in London, called Semir Zeki. And he's done a series of experiments looking at the different networks in the brain that are activated when people experience beauty in a number of different kind of modalities. Because what he was looking for is to see whether there was a unique signature to beauty, that regardless of the sensory system through which beauty was being experienced. So what he found was that there is. And he even looked at mathematical beauty in his second experiments. It's a very abstract form of beauty. He recruited some mathematicians who really know what mathematical beauty is. So what it showed was that these networks are associated with our networks that are activated in romantic love. So beauty and love very closely related, and very much linked to the reward pathways in the brain, as well as the endorphin pathways that I mentioned earlier. Because love and care and attachment is mediated by the endorphin system in humans, as well as the so-called love hormone oxytocin. So this is Donald Winnicott, whose ideas I draw on quite a lot in the book. And he was a pediatrician as well as a psychoanalyst. He was based in London. He pioneered, I think, the understanding of creativity as well as other things, but he took creativity very seriously, and he understood how essential it is to mental health. And I think one of the things that's so important about gardening is that how it can liberate people to feel creative, who might struggle to feel creative in other ways. We're working with nature's creativity, so it's a kind of coming together of human creativity and the creativity in the natural world, which I think makes gardening such a potent experience of creativity. And one of the things I encountered in my research and interviewing people on various projects that I visited, was a real sense that that having felt so low and their self-esteem being so poor beforehand, that this attribute of gardening, the fact that they could grow something, whether it was a squash plant or some tomatoes or beautiful flowers, and other people would say, wow, you've done that. Or that they could collectively as a group share this produce and feel that they'd really done something worthwhile. This is such an important part of the kind of empowering effect that gardening has. The other aspect of Winnicott's thinking that I draw on is his notion of transitional space, the idea of the in-between space. And this is where activity happens, where children inhabit this transitional realm when they're playing. You know, they move freely between fantasy and the real world. And gardens have this quality. You know, we're absolutely in touch with the earth, with all sorts of realities. You know, there's no escaping that things die in the garden. You know, we've got our hands in the earth, so we're grounded. And yet there's a lot about playing and dreaming, and in some ways, you know, whatever it is we're trying to create, you know, it may be our own personal ideal of a garden, it may be a memory, you know, that there's something about the conjoining in a garden of these two aspects of the psyche that is so important. But the other thing about gardens is that they're physically transitional. They are an in-between space, as I mentioned earlier. And this is very, very important when it comes to hospital gardens. I'm going to move on to that. So this is a photograph taken at Salisbury General Hospital of the Horatio's garden, which was developed initially by Olivia and David Chappell, who set up a charity in memory of their son Horatio, who was tragically killed on a school expedition when he was only 17. And he had been volunteering at this unit, and along with all the other spinal injury units in the country, of which there are 11, this one, just like the others, had no outdoor space. Well, the only outdoor space was the car park. So if somebody wanted fresh air, wanted to get outside, they would need to be wheeled outside. Spinal injury patients are in hospital for a long time, typically 6 to 9 months. There's a great deal of rehabilitation, often surgery that needs to take place, and a great deal of adjustment, psychological trauma, coming to terms with loss and life change. You know, when you think back to the history of hospitals, back to the large hospitals that were built by the Victorians, they always had gardens. Garden was part of it. The environment was seen as part of the curative process. With the kind of expansion of hospital building in the 50s and 60s and 70s, that concept was lost. And, you know, where there were gardens, they were built over and turned into car parks frequently. And this unit happened to have an area of sort of slightly waste ground next to it. And Horatio, who'd been volunteering there, had already kind of begun developing the idea of creating a garden there, because he was so appalled that these patients were so disconnected from nature and so disconnected from simple things like fresh air. So this is a photograph taken in the garden, and as you can see, patients can be wheeled out. The gardens are designed so that patients can be wheeled in their beds as well as come out in wheelchairs, depending on the nature of their injuries. One of the young men in this unit who I spoke to described what a transformative effect the garden had had on his ability to stay in touch with his friends, because the garden gave them a place where, as he put it, you both want to be, you know, and for him, asking his friends to come into the ward would have felt much more difficult. Whereas being able to be out in the sun, to enjoy the beauty around them, and you know, it gives also another source for conversation, which is very important. You know, to notice the changes in a garden. And the other thing about these gardens is they're run by volunteers, which the charity funds. It's not, you know, it's not a burden on the NHS. And the volunteers, the interface with the volunteers is very, very important for patients, because again, it's a kind of in-between experience. And this is very good preparation for leaving hospital, to actually have conversations with people who are not hospital staff, who bring in something different from the outside world with them. I'm gonna move on. I can see time is going on. So I'm just gonna end by talking about prison gardens, which I mentioned earlier, and a couple of community gardens. So this is actually taken on Rikers Island, which is the main prison complex for New York City. And the Horticultural Society of New York have been running projects there for, well, since the late 80s, actually, for quite a long time. And their work there has really expanded in the last 5 or 6 years. And there are now 8 gardens in different units on this island, which is one of the largest penal colonies in the world. I'm going to show you another slide so you can see. This is Hilda Cruz, who runs the project. And I like to show this slide because I think it also really emphasizes the human aspect of any kind of mental health project or rehabilitation project or prison project, that actually, you know, that interface, having a therapist, having someone who holds everything together, who can also really gauge what people need at any given time, how much they can take on, whether they're ready to work with others yet, or whether they need to work on their own. This project and the next project I'm going to show you, which is San Quentin Prison. This is the flower garden that was created by the Insight Garden project, which was set up by Beth Waitkus at San Quentin, and has now got various satellite projects in about 8 different Californian prisons. What this project and the Rikers Island Hort project have in common is that they have very good links with the community after men and women are released from prison. So that actually those who've attended and begun to learn about horticulture are able to carry on in various forms of community gardening outside, and that's really crucial to the success of these projects. I think that continuity, and it's one of the things that can be more difficult in the UK. The prison gardens, of which there are many really good examples here, are run by the prison service within the prison service, and it can be very difficult to create these links. There are lots of good examples where there are those links. There are many where they're not, and I heard about frustrations from people running prison gardening projects when they found it so hard to find a placement for someone outside. The reoffending rates for the Hort's project on Rikers and for the Insight gardening projects in California are really impressive. So the reoffending rate for prisoners who haven't attended, as it were, is 60%. So after 3 years, 60% of prisoners are back inside. But for those who've attended one of these projects, it's reduced to 10 to 15%, which is really a very impressive difference. This is just another slide of creating raised beds in San Quentin. I'm going to move on here. So I just want to mention community gardening and flag up a couple of important points about it. This slide is actually taken in the South Bronx. It's a project that's run by the International Rescue Committee and the New York Botanical Garden. So it's for refugees. And I'm going to this is the making of the garden a few years back, and this is how it looks now. So you can see it's kind of it's a thriving place, it's a working place, and there's a market. So it brings people in from the neighborhood to buy produce. And what the organizers have noticed is that the people working in this garden who attend the project come from all different parts of the globe. But there's something about gardening as an activity that helps connect people. And that's earned the name gardening as a social bridge. And there are many reasons why that's so effective. You know, some of it is down to the way that food connects us, for example. You know, many projects will have perhaps a weekly or a monthly ritual of sharing food, you know, food that's been grown and harvested. But there's also an effect which I was fascinated to discover in the research on the effects of nature on us, which I don't think we don't understand by any means, but it is clearly, I think, an effect which can be measured and has been measured in different situations, whether that's in gardens or people surrounded by trees, or actually plants, indoor plants in offices and so on. That actually contact with green nature seems to help shift people towards a more empathetic mode of relating, and on top of that, sort of encourages more generous kind of responses. So it sort of shifts our state of mind towards something that's perhaps more open to connecting with other people. And I'm just going to show you one more. So this is a project which appears in the book. It's the Windy City Youth Harvest Project in Chicago, which is another great example of those kind of effects in action. These are at-risk young people, many of whom they've almost all never put their hands in the soil before, and they're living in parts of the city that are, you know, that are in some cases really troubled by gun crime and so on. You know, and the garden gives them a safe place to come to learn and actually to really benefit from some of those feelings I was talking about earlier, feeling that they've actually taken part in something worthwhile. You know, many of these kids have never been praised for anything they've done before, and gardening gives them that, you know, when they can actually stand on the market stall that raises money for the garden and sell produce that they've helped to grow. And then this very last slide is actually back home. This is taken in our orchard, which we're developing at the moment into a community gardening project, and also an education and health project. And this was taken in July, at the beginning of this July. We set this up at the beginning of the pandemic. That's what I meant to say. So this is like the first season of growth in July. And you know, Tom and I are developing this. We're calling it the Surge Hill Project for Gardening and Health. That's our current title for it. But actually, it had a fantastic effect for people living in our hamlet. Where there are about 30 people here, and it brought people together in a safe way, a very supportive way during that first wave when life was very difficult. So I'm going to end there because I know I've run on.
Thank you so much, Sue. It's absolutely fascinating talk. And I'm sure people have lots of questions. I loved seeing the pictures. When reading the book, I didn't feel the lack of pictures at all, but it's actually also a real treat. I mean, there are pictures at the end of the book, but it's a real treat seeing all of these pictures too. And just hearing you talk so fascinatingly about all of them. I've just got a couple of questions I'd like to kind of kick off with, if that's okay.
Yeah.
It must feel so strange having talked for over an hour with not a squeak from anyone, but I know people were nodding and participating, and the chat was quite active as well. Welcome back to the world of interactivity as well. In your book, you do paint actually a very dark picture of the hospital and care system, and towards the end of your own time working as a lead clinician. I know your department was facing deep cuts, redundancies, and really high levels of stress. And actually, this was before COVID.
Yeah, this is long before COVID. This was
long before COVID.
Yeah, it was way back. Yeah, 2015. That kind of time.
I just wonder where you see things now in the hospital and care system. I mean, this is a very broad question, but in particular, do you think that the efficacy of social and therapeutic horticulture and the importance of including plants and gardens in care settings is beginning to get through to fund holders and decision makers?
I think it is. As always, it's sporadic and it's patchy. I think that one of the things that has happened as a result of the pandemic is a greater awareness of the need to care for staff health, actually, and you know that's taken a huge toll. It's been a terrible toll, really, on doctors and nurses and others working in health. So I hope when we come out of this that actually that will be seen as a priority. And I think the fact that so many people, you know, I honestly don't think ever in our history as a species have so many people around the world, you know, simultaneously experience the sort of the need for nature for mental health. You know, that effect of us being so suddenly deprived of all our social supports and our social interactions really brought nature to the fore. And of course that's what people are experiencing in hospital. You know, they're confined, and you know their interactions are reduced, and they're also anxious and afraid. And nature is so important in that situation, having some connection with it.
Yeah. I also wondered if you might, is the most amazing bibliography in the well-gardened mind. And obviously the first thing I'd want to direct people to is to buy the well-gardened mind and read it. But I wonder too, if there are other books that you particularly might direct people towards out of the research and the writing of the well-gardened mind that you particularly think people might enjoy.
I'm a great fan of Michael Pollan, you know, his book Second Nature, which I quote from. There's Robert Pogue Harrison's Gardening: The Human Condition. They're all in the bibliography. And also I love Stanley Kunitz, the American poet, and his book that he produced when he was nearly 100, and he lived to see it published, called The Wild Braid, about his relationship with the garden. So yeah, those are all big favorites of mine.
Great, thank you. Josh, have you gathered any questions from the chat that you'd like to put to Sue on behalf of the questioners?
To be honest, no, not really. Only because the last sort of section of the chat has really just been an outpouring of compliments, basically, about how sort of inspiring this evening has been. I think the one thing that has consistently come up is the number of individuals that Sue has spoken about over the course of the evening. There was a lot of curiosity about those individuals, and obviously the big suggestion there is that if you haven't read The Well-Gardened Mind, now is the time to purchase and do that. I did just drop a message in the chat to say that I will include a list of sort of individuals referenced, and also the list of the books and sort of bibliography that Sue just gave us in the description, that will go along with the video version of this event once it's up on the website and on the BPCG YouTube channel. So if you do want to refer back to that, that will be an available resource. I've just had a question that's come through though from Clifton, who asks, how can we maximize the benefits in our own gardens? And I think that is a particularly relevant question on a theme that was something that we've returned to a lot at BPCG, which is how can we as individuals put the learning from resources like the Well-Gardened Mind into practice in our own lives? And I guess I would also extend that outwards a little bit. So, you know, from beyond just your own garden, what can we do as individuals in a society to sort of champion the benefits that have been made so sort of clear over the course of this evening? What can we do to maximize the positive effects on ourselves as individuals, but what can we do in terms of changing our behavior to try and extend those benefits to, you know, to society at large?
I think maybe it's good to start with biodiversity, which hasn't sort of come up. Well, I mentioned it with our meadow, but I think, you know, when we emerge from the pandemic, we are facing another crisis, aren't we? Which actually was very present in my mind when I was writing the book. You know, the climate crisis and the sort of depletion of biodiversity. You know, the decline in pollinators and birds and so on. And I think in terms of our own gardens, I think I'm a great fan of wildlife gardening, and the research backs up in a way the sort of beneficial effects for us as well. So you know, the more biodiversity there is in a garden or a parkland setting, the more restorative it is. And I think that's something that we need to take on board, really. You know, it's what's good for us is actually good for the planet. And we've kind of lost sight of that collectively, rather, haven't we? So I think that's one thing I would say. I think when we emerge as collectively from this, and you know, I think the themes that I was ending on about how community gardens can bring people together, you know, and Brockwell greenhouses is such a great example of a community garden. Be a real resource, but also connect people in an unthreatening way. And you know, it's already clear that you know, that there's been the fear and anxiety about the virus, the economic situation we've got already and is going to come in its wake, is going to create all sorts of schisms and tensions. And I think community gardens are going to be really, really a valuable resource, actually, in you know, taking hopefully, you know, something better forwards.
Fantastic, thank you. We are coming up to the end of our time. So if there are any last questions from anyone in the chat, now is the time to drop them in. But just set significant sort of more messages of support and thanks to you, Sue, for just a really inspiring and engaging evening.
Thank you. Thank you.
In that case, Kate, if you don't mind, hold on, you've muted yourself and I have to ask you to unmute. Bear with me. There you go.
That's fine. I was like, oh, he's not going to unmute me. Sue, thank you so much. It's as Josh said, everybody's just been so grateful. I really feel that you write about in the book actually how gardening is in itself a simple social process and one of reciprocity. And we tend the earth in exchange for the gift of it. And I feel tonight's been a real gift to us all. Thank you so much. And,
thank you, Kate.
you know, really, and it will inspire us all to go out and ensure that, you know, the gift of gardening is extended to as many people as possible. So thank you very, very much. It's been a great evening.
Yeah, no, I was really thrilled to join you, and I'm longing to come and do something in person when we're allowed to do these things.
You have an open invite. Josh.
Right, so I'm just going to take the final minutes just to drop a couple of links with you, chat. The first is for the next and final event in this sort of run of BPCG at Home online talks on the theme of women on nature and wildlife. On a month from today, on March the 9th at 7 p.m, we will be welcoming Jo Ferguson, who is a specialist in urban ecology and conservation, and particularly in regards to bats. I'm going to call her the Batwoman now and get it out of my system, because she's probably heard that a million times, and I'm definitely not going to do it in a month's time. That link is live in the chat now if you want to open that up. If again, tickets are free or whatever you can afford. And I'm also just going to finish on one final link. Obviously 2020 and now 2021 have been a challenging year for everybody, but it's presented some particularly acute difficulties for community resources like ours at BPCG. I'm not going to give you a sob story. Now it's time for dinner. But if you would like to donate either as a one-off or as a small regular contribution, that link is now in the chat as well. You can head to our Just Giving page and do whatever you feel from them. We would be extremely grateful. That is everything from me. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us, and thank you especially to Sue Stuart Smith. If you could show your appreciation, use the chat function, use the wave thing to just say thank you very, very much. And we hope to see you again at the next BPCG at Home online event. Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right. Okie dokie. I'm going to end this meeting, everyone, so have a great evening.